the same number of syllables in the last word, then it's about time to start giving thought to the other one. And that applies both way around. I mean, it's a bit dull to have everything with 2 syllables at the end, and it's just as dull to have everything with 3 syllables at the end. And it's something I try and keep in my mind as I'm writing a poem. Again, not as the first consideration, but if I've written, say, 5 lines and they've all got the same type at the end, I think it's about time to get a bit of variety in. If not in the next line, certainly in the line after, something like that. That's the sort of thought process behind it. So again, it's not the top priority. The top priority is making it scan and making sense. But the longer the poem is, the more it starts to matter to make these sort of variations. And the other place where I think you start to notice if things aren't varied enough is in whether you have a break at the end of the 4th foot or not. In other words, obviously we're always ending dactyl spondy. So 5th foot's a dactyl, 6th foot spondy. The sort of variations we're playing with are obviously 2-syllable word at the end, or 3-syllable word at the end. So 2 or 3, you want to be varying between those two. You also want to be thinking about the previous word, and obviously, depending on what you end with, if you have a word break at the end of the 4th foot, then what you're dealing with is either a dactylic word like that, 3-syllable word there before a 2-syllable word, or a 2-syllable word there before a 3-syllable word. Now, all of those combinations are fine, and some that, well, obviously, it's either that or it's that. Those are fine. But in each of those cases, you can have a longer word, in other words, a word that is extending back into the 4th foot, and it's desirable to do so, I think, from time to time. Again, all of these things are perfectly okay. They're about equal. None is better than any other. They're all equally okay. The only issue is having some variety between them. So it's boring if every time you have long words in that position that extend back into the 4th foot. It's equally boring if you never have long words that extend back into the 4th foot. In other words, if you find yourself falling into the same sort of pattern towards the end of the verse, it's time to have a change and inject a bit of variety. Again, I think one of the best ways of reminding oneself of this is just to take a page of, say, Virgil and look at what his practice is in that respect. How many times is he ending on a 2-syllable word? How many times on a 3-syllable word? And what is he doing with this issue of the end of the 4th foot? Is he having a long word that goes over that foot division, or is he not? And a bit of both, naturally, is what he's doing in almost all circumstances. So I think if we're thinking of what issues are of importance in what you might call more advanced technique, I think that sort of variety is what I consider most important. Is that more or less clear to everybody? Okay, I'll erase it then if we're happy with it. Some of you have mentioned to me, actually, the issue of what elisions are okay and what are not. I think this becomes more of a stylistic point than a point of rules. I mean, yeah, any elision which is legal, I mean, and all elisions are legal, so any elision which helps to make your line scan properly is acceptable, but I think it's worth thinking of whether your elisions are harsh or smooth, and how many of them you actually want to have. As to how many, that really is up to you. Depends, if you're thinking of imitating ancient authors, depends a bit about whether you want to be Virgil or whether you want to be Ovid. Virgil has quite a lot, Ovid has rather fewer. And basically, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I'd just do what is sensible for what you want to say, and if an elision is necessary to get yourself out of a hole, then, well, by all means, use an extra one. There's no problem with that. However, it can get overdone, and if you're finding every single line you write has got certainly more than one elision on, even if every line you write has got a single elision in, that's getting to be too many, really, over a course of several lines. So try and sort of practice writing lines which don't actually need elisions in order to work well. In other words, which use probably longer words, not necessarily, but probably longer words, and where the whole thing will run naturally without needing to resort to eliding anything. I think that really is quite good practice. If you are using elisions, I think they're much more natural. They work much better if they're what I call smooth rather than harsh. So the question arises, what do I mean by harsh? Well, a long, or particularly a diphthong, elided by a short is pretty horrid, really, in terms of sound. If you think what's happening in an elision, and this is, of course, also vital to remember, what you're doing, in technical terms, is totally removing the first syllable and replacing it with the length of the second syllable. So if you have something like a long A or a diphthong, which, of course, is a long syllable, and you're following it by, well, whatever vowel it may be, that's short by nature, yeah, what you're doing is totally removing that long syllable, that diphthong, and what you've got is that. And that sounds pretty nasty if you think of what you're doing in terms of the disruption to the natural pronunciation of these words. And that particularly applies, I think, if these words are short. So, I mean, if you've got a monosyllable, I don't know, word like hi, H-A-E, or he, H-I, and you start eliding that, well, that is a little bit nasty on the ear. Legal and acceptable, so yes, if you can't think of anything else, by all means do it, but think of alternatives if you can, try not to. Similarly, a smooth elision is, particularly, a short ending of a word that's more than one syllable, especially if elided by a long, and especially if it sounds nice. It does come down to being a purely aesthetic question. If you think it sounds smooth and pleasant, then it probably is fairly smooth and pleasant. So, a smooth elision, short ending, elided by long, and also, I think a smooth end is in a sort of a natural position. Focusing the mind on the fact that you're doing a fudge here. If, for example, the only way you can get a legal caesura in your line is by using an elision, that's a bit off-putting and harsh. If the elision is just in the middle of the first half of the line or sort of in about the third or fourth foot in the second half, that's okay. It's not dominating one's view of the line and not feeling too forced. In general, ancient poets avoided elisions, particularly harsh elisions, towards the end of the line in the fifth and sixth foot. This is by no means a hard and fast rule, and indeed one of the little exercises we did yesterday for single lines did contain a fifth foot elision. The phrase was Sidera Olympi, and that's a perfectly nice line, I think. Sidera, that elides, Sidera Olympi, perfectly nice ending, nothing wrong with that. I wouldn't do it too often, though, and I don't think that poet would have done. Once, maybe in a page, okay. More than once is starting to get a bit off-putting, so best not to do it too much towards the end of the line. Certainly, if the only way you can get your fifth and sixth feet to work is by resorting to elision, that's started to get a little bit nasty. And the other thing to avoid, I think, is what I mean by that is, obviously you've got your final spondee. If you have, obviously, a two-syllable word at the very end, absolutely fine. But if you've got those two short syllables of the fifth foot dactyl as a single word, and if before that, I think it's better, if you're going to do this, it's better to have a monosyllable there and then a two-syllable word. I mean, I think I suggested to somebody a bit earlier on, sort of, well, the word may and kitor meaning fast or something like that. May, kitor, that's okay in the fifth foot, I think. What is much less okay is to have a longer word than that. In other words, if that word extends back into the fourth foot, we really do have a rather nasty disruption of the coincidence of ictus and accent. Now, I don't know whether you are all familiar with these terms. Probably not, and some of you I know. This is very familiar. Some of you are probably not familiar. By the ictus, we mean the metrical beat of the verse. And that is, in a dactylic hexameter, that is a metrical stress on the beginning of each foot. So if I'm here marking the ictus with a little x, that is very simple. The first syllable of each foot has a sort of beat to it,